Hey everyone, how are we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and welcome to today's video on preflop basics. Now I want to start off the preflop section by going over some things I think are very important preflop, some different mentalities and things we want to understand, just because playing preflop correctly is just so important in poker. If you can play preflop really well, chances are postflop is going to line up pretty nicely as well. So in today's video I want to talk about position and talk mostly about why position is king. Then I want to talk about opening, talk about different ranges, talk about open limping, if it's good, if it's bad, talk about tightness, is it good, is it bad, blah blah blah. Then I want to talk a little bit about stack sizes, talk about the stack sizes we should use versus not, talk about how other players use stack sizes, and talk about how to adjust against them. And then lastly, I want to wrap up by talking a little bit about SPR, which is a very powerful preflop and flop concept that can really help us create the correct ranges and stuff preflop and stay out of bad situations and really focus on really good plus EV situations. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it, start having some fun, and work on our preflop basics. So the first thing I want to talk about is position, and as I said earlier, position is king. If we can use position well, we are able to play preflop better, postflop better, we're able to have more information, and this is why our major focus should be late position and playing hands when, if we do happen to end up going postflop, that we have position. We get to see how our opponents react to postflop, we get to see how they react to turns and rivs and flops, we get to see what they're doing, we also get to close action. So if we want to take a free card or if we want to throw in that value bet on that river, it's a lot easier to do so. So our major focus should be position, and that means looking at the table correctly and understanding where we want to put in more hands versus where we don't want to put in more hands. So let's actually look at a table and start talking a little bit about the way that I would suggest looking at a poker table when thinking about position. So I like to look at a poker table like a giant stoplight with a red section, a yellow section, and a green section. And let's start with red first. So with the red section, I usually tend to treat my early position as my red section of the stoplight. And the reason why I do that is because I really suggest that you stop and think before you start opening hands from early position or playing hands from early position for that matter. And the big reason why I suggest that is because when you're in early position, there are a lot of people left to act after you, and also those people could easily take position on you. You could get called by the cutoff or button, and then when you have to go post-flop, you're out of position, and it's very difficult to play. And because of that, why do you want to throw in a bunch of extra hands when your most likely situation is that you're going to have to go post-flop a fair chunk, or at least more often, and also you're usually going to be doing so out of position. So from early position, I'm going to suggest that you be the absolute tightest in your opening range. And also even just say someone from under the gun decides to open and you're next to act, even being careful there as far as how often you want to be cold calling when there are a lot of people left after you who could squeeze you, who could call you and have better hands and again be able to play better post flop. So definitely make sure you're being very careful from early position, and just as a general default, be tight from there. Be very cautious about the range of hands that you're opening, and that will usually be a very good suggestion overall. So the next section I want to talk about is the yellow section, or what I usually consider my middle position area. And from there, I definitely am still going to be cautious, but I'm not going to be as tight as I would be from, say, early position. And the reason being is that there's just less people left to act after me, and especially less people between myself and the button, which is definitely a good thing for me. So again, I'm definitely always focused on trying to ensure that I'm going to be in position post-flop as much as possible, that I'm not going to be putting myself out of position knowingly a ton of the time. So from here, I definitely still want to be cautious. I definitely want to make sure I'm double checking, and I'm starting to become more dynamic from middle position. From early position, I'm kind of going to be using a little bit more of a static range of hands that doesn't change as much as it would, say, from middle position. And as I go from, say, from red to yellow and then from yellow to green, I'm definitely getting more and more dynamic. So I'm looking around, I'm looking at the entire situation, who specifically is behind me, and I'm starting to come up with ideas on how I want to change my opening range. Do I want to tighten it? Do I want to open it wider? Do I want to do some other creative things? Do I want to cold call? Do I want to 3-bet? Blah, blah, blah. So these are the little things I'm definitely thinking about. And so from the middle position, I'm definitely getting a pinch more dynamic. Who's really behind me? Who's really between me and the button? Is there someone who's going to cold call me every single time? Are there a bunch of tight people behind me? If there's tighter players, chances are I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive in my opening range for middle position. Just like if there's really aggressive three betters or really aggressive cold callers, chances are I'm going to tighten up a little bit more for middle position as a default. So again, definitely playing more hands for middle position than early position, but still want to be very cautious. As a default, still going to be relatively tight. I'm not going to be crazy from here, but definitely make sure you're starting to become a bit more dynamic for middle position especially. The next section is going to be the green section, or late position, more specifically the button and the cutoff. And from these positions, I'm definitely going to be the most aggressive because there are less players between myself and the blinds, so stealing becomes much easier, especially from the button. There's only 2 players left to act after me if it's folded to me, and that's something that I want to definitely be aware of, and I definitely want to be picking up blinds whenever they are available. So if there are players in the blinds that are tight, well, I'm going to be more aggressive, and even if they're not as tight, well, if they do happen to call me, at least I'm going to be in position when I go post flop. So there's all these good things that come by being aggressive from late position. So from the button and cutoff, I'm definitely going to be more aggressive as a default, and I'm going to be way more dynamic. I'm going to be really looking at who are the last couple of players to left to act after me. What are they likely to do? Are they going to 3-bet me a lot? Are they going to flat call me a lot? Are they going to fold a lot? Then I create ranges based upon their tightness or looseness and also their mistake propensities. So these are the things that we want to be aware of, and this is important when we're open raising, but also important when we're doing things like cold calling. So again, I'm going to cold call tighter from early position than I would from middle position, and I'm even going to cold call a little bit more aggressively in late position because I can take position on players, I can abuse them and take position post flop against them, so I can make better decisions than they can, hopefully. So these are the things I'm definitely looking for, and again, from late position, there's just fewer players left to act after you. Chances are you're going to be in position post-flop if you go there. On the button, you're always going to be in position post-flop. So definitely make sure you're paying attention to these things and adjusting your range accordingly, not just being static and using a quote-unquote hand chart, but really saying, okay, here's the situation, here's my position, here's what I expect to have happen, and then choosing an appropriate range based upon your answers. Okay, so let's actually look at a table real quick and make sure that we can figure out how to use this stoplight. So this is a full ring table or a 9 max table. So I would consider the first 3 positions to be my red positions, the middle positions to be my yellows, and the late positions or the cutoff and button to be my greens. And taking that position idea a step further, I'm usually going to be the absolute tightest from the small blind and big blind, just in the general sense. Strictly because when I'm in the small blind and I have to go post flop, I'm always going to be out of position, which of course makes post flop very, very difficult. So I want to be very selective from the hands that I play from these small blind and big blind. But if we take a situation where, say, it folds around to us in the small blind, well, now there's only one person left to act after us. So I'm probably going to be more aggressive from that situation where there's only one person left to act after us. So there's only one person between myself and the blinds, and I'm probably going to be very aggressive in the way that I steal. Of course, I still want to be dynamic. I still want to think about how is he going to 3-bet us, how is he going to flat call us and play post flop if he does that a lot. But as a default, I'm going to steal very aggressively from the small blind, and then aggressively from the button, and then a little less from the cutoff, and a little less from the hijack, and onwards and onwards. So again, as I get closer to late position, as I get closer to less people acting between myself and the blinds, I'm going to be more aggressive with my opening ranges, and that's just a really general good default. So again, this is a full ring table. That's the way that I would approach a full ring table as far as the stoplight setup is concerned. And let's actually look at a 6 max table to make sure that we understand how to carry over when we're playing with shorter handed tables. Okay, so this is a 6 max table. So in this particular table, I would treat early position as my red, middle position as my yellow. I would treat the button and cutoff still as my green positions, and I would carry the same mindset from the blinds. Being aggressive if I'm open stealing from the small blind, and in other situations usually just going to be relatively tight from there. So again, this is just the general way I would approach it. Now I still want to be dynamic. If I'm in middle position and the cutoff and button are very, very tight players, chances are I'm going to be more aggressive, even though from a static standpoint I would have been tighter from middle position. So definitely make sure that you're still adjusting and looking at the entire situation. Just like if I were on the cutoff, which is normally a green position, but the button is just a mega 3-better, why am I really going to sit there and keep opening hands that the button is just going to 3-bet me off of? So again, make sure you're being dynamic, looking at the entire situation, who's behind you, how do they tend to play, and creating ranges and ideas that are best given the exact situation that you have. Okay, so we've talked a lot about position, and again, just remember, position's very important. If you have to go post flop or you think it's likely that you're going to go post flop, make sure you're thinking about, are you going to be in or out of position for that, and how does that relate to your edge and your EV and that overall hand. So the next thing I want to talk about would be opening, and when I talk about opening, I'm talking about open raising, which means that I am opening the pot. So an open raise is if everyone has folded up to that point and a player raises the pot. Simply that easy. So as far as what do we want to open raise with, which is a question I get a lot of the time, and the answer that I give usually angers people, but I'm going to give it nonetheless, is that we should usually not look for static opening ranges, strictly because they are not the best. We want to be very dynamic at all times, and also our opening range would change based on which game we're playing, if we're playing 6-max or full ring, or even heads up, and our opening ideas are going to change based upon what level we're playing at, based upon how much 3-betting there is at that level, how much cold calling there is at that level, how much cold calling there is with a propensity to fold to a C-bet at that level. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into creating an opening range. So what I'm going to say just as a default is play tighter if you're ever confused. Just as a pure default, if you play tight from early position, that's going to keep you out of a lot of trouble. And playing tight is relative. So take a hand like pocket sixes. Pocket sixes would be a standard open raise for me under the gun at 6-max, but pocket sixes would be a standard fold for me under the gun at full ring. So it definitely does change, and what is tight is definitely different. And a lot of people tend to get confused, especially on the Broadway hands like Ace Jack and King Queen. Do we open it? Do we not? As a default, I usually suggest waiting until middle position, both at full ring and 6-max with those kind of hands, strictly because then there's less players left to act after you. You're going to have a better idea on whether or not that was a good open in the first place, and again, just keeps you tighter from early position. So without a lot of information, or even some information, just as a default, be tighter from early position, and then loosen up as you get closer to the button, and again, become more dynamic. So if your standard range from middle position would be, say, deuces plus and I don't know, ace jack plus, king queen plus, whatever it be, but there's a bunch of really, really loose players behind you who are doing a lot of 3-betting, maybe I might tighten up. By the same token, if there's a bunch of really tight players behind me who are doing a tremendous amount of folding, I might just start opening more hands, things like topside suited connectors, any 2 Broadway cards, that sort of stuff. So always make sure that your opening ranges are dynamic. Now, another question that comes up that's tied to this is open limping. So if I'm not feeling comfortable raising a hand like, say, ace-jack suited from early position, can I open limp it? And my normal suggestion would be, if you're playing online, don't. Because open limping is usually a very bad thing to do online. Too many people are competent against it. You're going to get isolated a ton. People are going to attack you a lot. And you're oftentimes going to find yourself in situations where that open limp is just costing you a ton and ton of money. And I also mean usually don't open limp pocket aces and go for that limp re-raise like a lot of people do. I'm not saying that it can't occasionally be the correct play, but as a default, if you just kind of either open raised or folded your range, that would be better. And also, again, just make sure you're checking the entire situation. If you're confused on whether or not you should open raise something, just be tighter, and as a default, usually dumping a lot of stuff that you're confused with. The other piece of the opening is the size. Now my normal sizing strategy is going to be roughly 3x from early position to middle position, and then opening up closer to like 2.5x as I get towards late position, and opening about 3.5x from the small blind if I'm stealing. That is usually pretty good, keeps me raising a little bit stronger from early position because I'm already raising the stronger range, so why not just add a little bit more on the size? Creates more money and value for me, hopefully. And then also from late position, I use a slightly smaller size because there's less people to contend with. I give myself a better price on the steal. Risking 2.5 to win the blinds is better as from a math standpoint than risking 3 to win 1.5. So that's definitely the way I look at it. But there's other things that go into it. For instance, if someone in the blinds is going to call my steal a lot but fold to a ton of c-bets, well, I might make my steal size just a pinch larger. So again, even your sizes are going to be dynamic. But as a default, I tend to be a little bit bigger from early position, around the 3x ballpark, 3 to 4, somewhere in there. As I get closer to late position, it gets a little bit smaller just because I'm opening a stronger range. I'm opening a wider range. I need to risk a little bit less to pick up the money most of the time. So why risk more if I don't have to? So again, that's kind of my general spiel on opening. If you're ever confused, be tighter. And when you're in middle and late position especially, be very, very dynamic. Think about who's behind you. Think about what they're likely to do. And then create ranges that work best in that situation and at that particular table. Another thing I want to touch on in this video would be stack sizes. So there's two things I want to talk about. One, what stack size should we use? And then two, how do we adjust against other stack sizes? So first, what stack size do we want to use? Well, as a default, I'm going to say that you should usually play roughly 100 big blind stack size as a default. If the maximum buy-in for your particular level is 100 big blinds, I would buy in for 100 big blinds. The reason why I say that is because as a player with a good edge, as a good, competent, strong player, usually you want to have the most amount of big blinds in front of you so you can just abuse everyone that's playing at that table. That's really the mentality that we use. And that's not to say that there isn't and there aren't pros for using smaller stack sizes, say 20 big blinds or 40 big blinds, but most of the time if you're using a short stacker buy-in, something like 20 big blinds or 40 big blinds, you have a very specific strategy for that stack size. And that is mostly, the smaller the stack size is, the more focus is going to be on pre-flop and or flop play. So make sure that you're aware of that if you are using a funky stack size, like say 40 or 50 big blinds, is you have to be very, very competent at that stack size. Now, I personally think that a higher stack size is going to be able to yield you a higher win rate in the long run, both in terms of right this moment and in the long run as you start moving higher and higher. So these are the things that I'm looking for as far as my own stack size. Now, I will say this. Let's say you're playing 100 big blind deep and you end up doubling up, you're up to 200 big blinds, and you don't quite feel comfortable. Maybe there's some really aggressive people that are 3-betting you that are also 200 big blinds deep or whatever it be, and you're trying to figure out what you want to do. There is nothing wrong, in my opinion, with just getting off the table. If you have 100 big blinds, you double up to 200, you don't really feel comfortable there given the table, given the situation, given the dynamic, whatever it be, just simply get off, get on another table, and restart with your 100 big blinds. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Now, if it's a table where no one's really pressuring your stack at all and there's still fish at that particular table, I wouldn't get off just because I have 200 big blinds. I'd only get off if I have too many big blinds and I'm not comfortable given the exact situation that is around me. Okay, so that is what stack size do we want to use. So like I said, generally around 100 big blinds is where I want to be at, or deeper if there's fish that I can get involved with that are deep as well, that sort of thing. The other thing is, how do we adjust against other stack sizes? So the smaller that someone's stack size is, again, the more that game is going to become a earlier game. Our decisions are usually going to end pre-flop or on the flop. There's not going to be a lot of playing turns and rivers out very often against shorter stack size people. And also, different stack sizes tell us different things about people. So if someone is buying in for 20 big blinds and keeps reloading to 20 big blinds, that person probably has a strategy that is competent at 20 big blinds. If that person bought in for something like 60, there's not really many strategies out there that are specifically built for 60 big blind play. So usually I'm going to assume that people that buy in for somewhere between 50 big blinds and like 75 or 80 big blinds usually are not very good players. So definitely make sure you're using that to your advantage and look for that and look to abuse those players as much as possible. That's a read that I use a lot. If someone didn't start the hand with a full stack or started with a really awkward stack size, usually I assume they're going to be relatively bad. But again, make sure that you're focusing on their stack sizes, and again, the smaller their stack size is, the more often our decisions are going to end pre-flop or end on the flop against that player. So the smaller someone's stack size is, usually the stronger ranges we want to use against them. So if they open raise, say a 20 big blind or opens from early position, we want to be very tight with how we give them action, because chances are they're raising a tight range, and that if we want to get involved with them, we probably don't want to use hands like pack of nines or ace jack. Those are usually hands that are only going to get us in trouble. So there's nothing wrong with, say, folding that hand instead. So definitely make sure you're being very cautious about the range of hands you're giving action to these smaller stack sizes with, say, 20 to 40 big blinds. Or definitely be careful about the hand ranges that you're using. And even still so against, say, like a 50 or 60 big blind stack if you're considering 3-betting them. Be cautious. As a default, be tighter, get out of their way, and really only get involved with your value hands as a default. Once you have other information, you can use it, but as a default, remain tighter, especially against those players. So hopefully that gives you a good idea on how to adjust in the stack size game. Again, the smaller their stack sizes are, the more kind of the decisions are going to be early made. So definitely make sure, again, being tighter, being stronger side weighted against them, and really not doing a tremendous amount of pre-flop bluffing. So the last thing I want to talk about in this video is SPR. And SPR is stack to pot ratio, and it is a very, very powerful concept that I use a lot in my pre-flop and flop decision making. So the way that I use SPR is looking at it from a flop commitment standpoint. Am I committed or am I not committed to a particular situation? So the smaller an SPR is, the more automatically committed I am going to be to a particular pot, and the larger an SPR is, the less likely I'm going to be automatically committed to a pot. So let's look at a situation so we can kind of visualize this. Take a spot where MP opens, and we notice he started the hand with 40 big blinds. We decide to 3-bet, and he calls. So at this point, roughly 11 in the middle, roughly 15 back in the effective stack, and we always deal with effective stack when we're talking about SPR. And the effective stack is the smallest of the stacks involved, so in this particular situation, that would be $15. So what I do is I just take 15 divided by 11, which we see comes out to give or take around 1.5, and I make a decision from there. So at 1.5 or lower SPR, I am automatically committed to that pot with top pair or better. It's that simple. Which means that if I am going to knowingly create a 1.5 or smaller SPR pot, I want to be doing so with a range that is going to catch top pair or larger a very, very large percentage of the time. So hands like queens plus are pretty much going to be my defaults, and other hands like ace king and jacks and tens and ace queen I'll use if the situation is appropriate. So this is what I'm looking for when I'm creating SPRs, is I'm saying, okay, if I 3-bet and my opponent calls, what SPR is going to be created? How is that good or bad? And I can tweak SPR. So for instance, say I had used a different 3-bet size. Say I had 3-bet this up to, say, 350. That's going to blatantly change the SPR that would be created going into the flop. If I had 3-bet here to $7, that's also going to change the SPR that's created going into the flop. So always make sure that you're checking the SPR that you're creating and making sure that you're creating situations that are profitable for you and that are going to generate profit. So in a situation like this, obviously we're committed. So that means if our opponent checks, we're in a commitment mode. We want to get our stack inside. We're going to get our stack inside. And if MP decides to do something like this where he open shoves, because we're automatically committed given it's 1.5 SPR or lower, this is just an automatic stack off. If our opponent happens to have us beat, sucks to be us, but majority of the time we are going to play this spot a lot better than most of our opponents. So again, the big thing to take away from this is what is SPR, what is the commitment threshold, which again is pretty much 1.5 if we have top pair or better, and then also making sure that we knowingly create SPRs that are favorable for us. Don't create situations that are bad. Don't put yourself into a low SPR situation with a very bad hand, because all you're doing is pretty much destroying value. So again, if you can use this well to your advantage, it's definitely going to be a very, very good and powerful thing, and definitely make sure you're considering SPR pre-flop as far as what SPR are you creating, and is that going to be good or bad. And we can look at SPR from a different situation, say a spot like this where we open, get called by the big blind, and we see that we have a very, very deep SPR here. So at this point, same exact flop, but you notice that at this point we are not automatically committed. So with a very deep SPR, I'm really only committing my stack if I think it's an excellent situation, I think I have a good edge in that particular spot, or I have a monstrous hand against someone who makes a lot of mistakes, that sort of stuff. So the deeper that SPR is, the less I'm automatically committed to a pot. So again, kind of the way I look at it is 1.5 or lower SPR, I'm kind of automatically committed. Between 1.5 to say 4 or 5, I'm kind of in that gray zone of I stack off sometimes, but I don't have to automatically stack off. And then at something like say 6 or 7 or plus SPR, I'm like never automatically committed unless I think that it's a great situation to get my stack inside. So if this were a spot where he checks, I see bet, and he decides to check raise, I'm not automatically committed in this situation, and I can make whatever play I decide to based upon whatever reads and information I have. So again, this is SPR. This is how we can use it. We can look at it from where are we automatically or not automatically committed, and then create lines and plays based upon that, and also create pre-flop ranges that correlate well with the SPR that we are knowingly creating. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Again, we talked all about position, we talked about opening, talked about stack sizes, and we also talked about SPR. And again, these are just kind of your pre-flop basics. These are the basic part of your pre-flop toolkit. And if you can understand them well, if you can utilize it all well, this is definitely going to benefit you greatly and give you a really nice precursor into the pre-flop material that we're going to be talking about. So if you have any questions on this or anything else, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, good luck out there, happy grinding, and good luck with your pre-flop basics.